It's been a super long journey. I mean, the very short version for those of you in the audience that may not know what I do, I started out as a DJ in Wilmington, Delaware. That's where I come from. Love Delaware to death. That trickled into me engineering my own projects when this thing called hip hop started to get popular. I was right there at the crust of it. So I've kind of seen the whole change in the game of us going from tape to computers. But it's one of those journeys where you're constantly trying to evolve and you're constantly trying to understand the medium a little bit better because of what it did to our industry. Like anybody else, I was right there when people started to ask the questions, well, how do we sell music if music is free, right? If music's on the internet, my daughter can download whatever she wants, or probably doesn't even care to download it. She's just watching YouTube, all day. How do we sell music, or how do we monetize what we do as artists? That's the big question that we find. And what it's done is it's sort of taken me all the way back to the beginning of trying to understand exactly what the mindset is of the people that consume music. Because if we look at the playing field, consumption of music is at an all-time high. But record sales and the traditional ways that we would gain revenue are at an all-time low. It's weird that sometimes musical ideas can transform to everything else. I sort of think of the world in terms of music, and I've really been trying to figure out how to fix MIDI. I don't know if everyone here knows, but MIDI is basically the way that we communicate as musicians now and the way that we communicate with our computers, right? It stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, right? It's this beautiful concept that grew out of I think, the most intelligent thing about open source codes, right? And it can very well represent the idea of playing on a keyboard, right? You can press up and down, we have velocity, we have on and off notes, stuff that we all know, right? Zeros and ones is very well represented. But when you try to represent something complex like the human voice, MIDI fails. When you try to represent something like the bowing of a string on a violin, MIDI fails. When you try to represent the blowing into all of the wind instruments that we have, MIDI fails. And it got me to thinking about this lock-in idea that we're now experiencing because we have certain number of years of developing things for the computer format. Things just don't develop just by themselves. They culturally develop, right? We're trying to solve certain problems. But in solving some of those problems, we accept a format and then move on from that format and allow that to be the basis of everything else that we do. That's what I've sort of been trying to focus on lately is what are those things that we have now that are sort of this lock-in mentality that we shouldn't be locked into. Certain things that our end users would want in a product that we have sort of overlooked because of the way that we create or the way that we think about these problems. In the 80s, we created the things that we're using now in terms of computers, right? I don't mean computers were started in the 80s. I mean going from this super room-sized computer to a desktop computer, right? It sort of happened in that time span. And then in the 90s, we sort of connected all of these computers together. We figured all that out, right? Then in this century, you sort of realized that we gave that thing sensors, or we allowed it to see and to touch and to feel and to hear, right? All of us are doing that every day more and more with every camera, with every iPhone, with everything. We're sort of giving sensors to this thing that we created as a should I say, as a race. And we further lock ourselves into all of the ways in which we think about certain things. So in me going back and saying, okay, well, I can take this application of MIDI and try to figure out a better way for musicians to converse with a computer and for a computer to converse with musicians, right? We have to start to sort of realize that we are a constant information-taking machine, that a lot of our our information doesn't come just from line source code, right? It doesn't come from pressing return and then waiting for some response. We take in information all the time. And that I probably stared at the number 0 and the number 1 for about 3 hours and realized that there's an infinite amount of space in between this 0 and this 1. So if we are only representing certain things by an off and an on pattern, what happens to all the information that's in between, right? What happens when we have a continuous stream of information that's trying to get represented as a 0 and a 1? So, you know, when I try to replicate certain orchestra music, it's just impossible for me to do with a MIDI application. And how does that affect everything else that we do inside of a computer? In thinking of new formats or new ways for our consumers to understand that the artist still wants to get compensated for what they do until we have a free society, that the album sale is not that important anymore, right? We've kind of, I hope artists at this point understand that. And some of them do, some of them don't. But this is where the importance of things like the bundle comes in, right? This is a great idea because it allows me to fixate on whatever information, the price that I want to put and the value that I see for it, right? So it's sort of a way of the artist controlling exactly what it is that they're selling. And it also gives the power back to them in terms of the things that are more important than just money, right? If I put my music on whatever service, iTunes, you know, I'm just using that as an example, I sort of lose the important part of the transaction. The money is one thing, but I'd also like to know the person's email of whoever's buying my music. I also want to know their personal taste. I want to know when they bought it, you know, the hour of operation. I want to know where they are. I want to know some of the other things that they're interested in so that I can then go and advertise in those places, find out who's sort of cool to that kid, and to put my music in that specific place. So that's sort of the challenge, I guess, for people that are in our world, that are creating the tools that people are going to use in the future of how are you servicing the audience and at the same time empowering the artist. And I can't say enough to me how impressive the bundle is. When I go there and I can download, let's say, of course I went to Public Enemy first, right? So I can download some Public Enemy stems and immediately start to do a remix. You know, my mind just started to race on the amount of remixes that could be done on my music. In that scenario that I first laid out, you know, you start to think of the important things. You know, something was important in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and then I start to realize, well, what's going to be important for the next 10 years? And it just hit me that I was actually sitting at my desk and I was touching a filter, and I was like, that's it. Filters are going to be the most important thing in the next 10 years, right? Why? Because there's so much information out there. There's so much being put up every single day. I get bombarded with emails all day, and I say to myself, I wish I had an intern that was me, that could sit down here and go through emails all day and listen to music and filter for me what's good and what's not good, right? That's going to be the important part of where we go next. Who's going to be the filter? Because I don't have time to go through every single person's Instagram. I don't have time to go through every email, to listen to every song. So I need some type of filter. I need someone to tell me, hey, this is cool to this group of kids. And this is cool to this group of kids. You know, we used to filter through television and through radio. That was the big deal, was to get on the radio or to get a record deal. Now the record deal means nothing, but I still need to be aware of the quality of whatever it is that this person is putting out. That could be music, that could be art, that could be whatever. It's something that's tailored to my taste. So if I then latch on to someone that I know has sort of the same taste that I do, or I respect their taste, they then become my filter. This is the job that's going to be created, or as I say, the lane that's going to be created in the next 10 years. It's going to become the most important thing. So as you're programming, as you're thinking about how people are going to use these tools, that filter, in my opinion, will become the biggest thing in the world. How someone receives the information, or how someone narrows down this infinite amount of information that we receive every day that we're bombarded with, right? These are the things that I think about in terms of how, well, if I have a new artist, how do I get to you to let you know that this person is important to me? What's the filter to get directly to you? Now we don't have that sort of gauge to figure out who's important and who's not important. So then we have, sort of an artist like Mac Miller that comes along in the rap world, and how many albums he sells is really not that important. But this guy's fan base has allowed him to become a millionaire and not really sell a whole gang of albums. Because in a couple of years, the record companies are not really going to be here in the same capacity that you see them now, right? They'll be glorified promotion companies or catalog companies, right? They'll sell a lot of catalog stuff, but the actual signing of someone, the development of the A&R department into this artist doesn't really exist anymore now, right? Now it's the band's job to develop themselves. And before, when the guy would say, okay, well, how many shows do you do per year? That question inevitably now becomes, how many Twitter followers do you have? I think back as well to the amount of work that it took for me as culturally. I come from a background where my musical journey was sort of backwards to the way that someone would naturally get into music. You would study music at a young age, you'd sort of join the band, and then you'd break off and have 3 or 4, bands of your own until you found the one that really got you successful, right? That's the normal story of most people that were successful in the music business. Hip-hop guys, we came in sort of backwards. We were from areas where we couldn't really afford instruments, so we got into records. And through digging through all these records is the way that I discovered music, all types of forms of music. But what we were looking for wasn't determined yet or wasn't set out yet. So you can imagine me spending hours and hours and hours of my life digging through what we call digging through records in record stores and gaining all of this information. I have records that took me 20 years to find, right? All those special little stories that you hear. And then now my son can get on the internet and get the exact same amount of music that I have in one day, right? He's pretty much matched my collection of those special records in a day. So I did a special called Crate Diggers, where they come and I hate to consider myself old, but they ask all the old guys, well, why is vinyl important to a kid? And my answer was kind of like, it's not. It's a cultural thing that I was involved with that was very much a part of that time period. But if you beg the question of why is vinyl important to my 10-year-old or my 12-year-old, it really isn't, which gets you to the core, it gets your mind thinking to the core of what really is important, is the music and not the medium, right? We sort of fell in love with the medium of the smell of records and the touch and the actual physically holding the record in front of you and reading the liner notes, which I kind of miss because nobody has liner notes anymore. But that actual thing, that experience is something that we fell in love with. So you have to kind of realize that your audience isn't in love with that anymore, right? So what is it that we really, really are selling? We're selling a vibration. We're selling the movement of those two speakers. We're selling that experience that the kid, when I say kid, or the end user gets. It doesn't matter what format it comes on. Those are just nostalgic things for us, and you kind of have to know when your audience likes those things and when they don't like those things in order to stay current and sell a product or service to someone of this next generation. I've had friends that go to film school and photography school for years and years and years, and now the things that took them forever to do with filters, I do in 2 seconds on Instagram, right? It's very true, and could probably get a better result faster than the traditional way. So, it sort of leads to this question another question that people bring up to me is like, well, why is an engineer important nowadays? Like, what's the point? Kids can figure out how to record and to put out music in their own bedroom. Why are you necessary? And I always respond and say, well, you can have a baby by yourself too, but it's kind of good to have a doctor there just in case some complications happen, right? It's the exact same thing. It's like, you know, the baby is going to come regardless if there's a doctor or not. But as wise people, we know that we kind of need a doctor just in case. You know, we value both of those lives. I hated Twitter, right, when it first started. My manager was yelling at me forever. This is the new way that people are going to talk to each other. And I was just like, well, I don't need to tell people that I just went to the bathroom or what I just ate. You know, like, to me, Twitter didn't make any sense. I didn't see the social value of it by just being locked into those characters. So it took me a long time to get onto social networking. And then Instagram came out, and I was like, oh, this is me. This is visual, right? I'm a very visual person. So when I got on there, I knew nothing of photography, right? So I'm taking pictures with my iPhone, and they look very basic if you go all the way back to the beginning of my Instagram. So then I started to watch other people and say, oh, this guy's pictures look cool. How does he do this, right? So I started to research and to study. And in maybe 2 hours, I probably consumed the same amount of information or had access to the same amount of information that a film student or a photography student takes 4 years to get. So in that 2 hours, now I have this concept of depth of field. Now I have this concept of what an f-stop is. Now I have a concept of shutter speed, right? When you look at these people that come in on very amateurish levels, what this is doing is introducing them into whole different worlds. So as the people that are facilitating this, or should we say filtering all this information to these people, you have to realize the steps that these people are going through and how this is different from the traditional way that people would gain information. So again, it's just taking us out of this locked-in mentality of how people consume things. These types of ideas or these types of thoughts are what dominate my thinking now, even more than like what chord I'm going to go to in the next song. Just because whoever figured this out is going to own the future, and that's really what it is, of making sure that we can sort of still filter quality, right? That's the biggest complaint about the internet, or what we lost by having access to everyone's conversation, is that we lost that quality control. I don't want to see everyone's pictures, right? Everyone shouldn't be taking a picture. Everyone doesn't have really cool, interesting pictures. But then I filter through other people the really, really cool pictures, right? We're going to be able to do that with every bit of information in every single genre. But to be able to take that and to monetize that is the key. So I think in the thinking of creative engineering and what people who are presenting services to someone, right, should be thinking about are those type of things. How do we creatively take people from one end of this, the whole world mass consumption, and filter it down to something that they may enjoy? When we get to the real heart of it, to the real core of it, the way that we save journalism, the way that we save television, the way that we save film, and the way that we save music, all of our creative things are to figure out the way in which we can filter the good stuff to people, or the things that are interesting to us. How do we filter all of that to these people and give the control to the artists to allow them to then give back to the audience that they were explaining themselves to in some creative form? The thing that I really love, and the reason that I'm here, you know, is because I love the idea that's being set up by this company. And I love the idea of free. I love the idea of an open source code. It's just, to me, it's the way that things should be. But until we have replicators and we're in Star Trek world and everything is free and we can eat for free, artists have to be compensated, you know, in some way for the art that they do. There's plenty of times when people have come up to me and said, oh, well, if you're promoting, you know, free, if you're promoting giving away stuff, how do you expect people to eat? How do you expect people to live? And I was on a panel and I looked around and I said, every single person on this panel doesn't work for a major corporation. You know, we are all in this world now where the internet allows us to do our job, or the job that would have taken a corporation and 5 secretaries, right? We answer emails, we set up engagements, we interact with people, we find out about our product and what our product is doing all on our phone. That's an incredible thing to me, that, you know, I am my own corporation at this point. And that's the way artists should look and feel about what they're getting into or what they're doing. So thank you guys.